Welcome to the J.D. Levy and Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
Welcome, everyone, to this month's episode of the Calibration Point Podcast. I'm very excited to have with us a friend and colleague, Keron, who is a process improvement consultant, but she's also a philanthropist and a community advocate and volunteer. This topic this month is really fascinating because we're going to explore not just cross-cultural engagement, but third culture engagement, and then in Keron's case, going in beyond. And when I use the word third culture, we're typically referencing somebody who has grown up the significant part of their development years outside of their country or culture of origin. And in Keron's case, she's grown up, was born in India, and then she moved to Canada and spent a large part of her life in Canada and then moved to the United States, and has just a fascinating perspective on things like boundaries, barriers to cross-cultural engagement as an immigrant, things that she sees in the United States that we need to better understand to engage people who are coming in as third culture or single culture, first culture immigrants coming in. Also perspectives on Canada and on India. Now, when she's able to look back into both of those countries. And she also brings a great, just really wonderful insight on how to volunteer in a cross-cultural perspective and the assumptions that she's been subject to and that she sees in organizations that can make it even more difficult for someone who is an immigrant to volunteer when they have the desire. But then things that we do in the nonprofit sector in the West that can create challenges for that. So Keron, as you can tell, we're just excited that you're willing to spend some time with us and talk through this topic. So maybe first, just to kick it off, I'm just going to throw it out to you and just let you kind of share. I would really like just to hear you provide maybe some of your cultural context, and then let's just jump in from there onto, what are some of the barriers that you've seen on cross-cultural engagement, the things that have made it difficult, or maybe assumptions that we make. Wherever we want to go, you just take us on this journey.
Thank you, Jamie, for having me be part of this conversation. I'm very fortunate to have three cultures to look at and give a perspective based on my experiences. So, as you said, growing up in India and then spending a large part of my life in Canada and then moving to the United States has given me a very diverse idea about how cross-cultural engagement and looks like in terms of when we look at community engagement. So if you can picture cross-cultural engagement as a coin, there are two sides of this coin. One is individual engaging in the community, and then the community is engaging the individual. So let's look at the first side, where the individual is engaging in the community. In my experience, this piece is going beyond the ethnic community and is driven by two factors. First is individuals' passion to serve, and then do they have a community organization that takes them, welcomes them, and uses their skills to really then move forward in their cross-cultural community engagement. It is vital to have that philanthropic bone in your body to make sure that you are getting out of your comfort community and getting out and serving. So why do I say that comfort community? Why do I talk about comfortable community area? It's because most immigrants that you see are coming from a different culture. So there is a community which is their immediate ethnic community that they're familiar with, including me. And then there is a community which is outside that, which is a larger community that they live in. So for most of us, we are serving two different communities, which is a subset of another. So that this dual nature, it's like having two mothers and you're serving both of them and you're wanting to keep both of them happy. And
Right.
it's challenging. It's challenging at times to understand which one do we want to keep the happiest, you know.
Mhm.
So sometimes this dual nature of engagement can be mistaken for lack of engagement. So I want us to understand that it's incorrect for us to assume that community engagement through this person who is an immigrant is not occurring. It's actually happening, but it may not look like cross-cultural when we look at it from the outside perspective. And I sometimes wonder, is anyone even looking at engagement within the community as part of community engagement? Because ethnic communities are the first landing spot for a lot of immigrants that come in. So
Right.
I think that's something we really need to look at. The second aspect that I always see is, the differences between my experience that I've had in Canada versus cultural norm in US. So in Canada is kind of considered more
Right.
norm. And I want to think of us as a giant Cobb salad, if I may say so, where each ingredient is important and it brings out the best in that salad without sacrificing their individuality. I do agree. The melting pot terminology may have served us in the past where we did not have as diverse of cultures, but I think we might need to think of this as a in a different analogy.
Yeah, I really like your point about the Cobb salad and that each element brings uniqueness, but is part of the individual flavor, but yet unifies to give it the full value of the salad as opposed to a melting pot in which and we lose a lot of identity, and then
Mhm.
we become just one kind of melted identity. And it's so true from I think just a cultural perspective that, even from the perspective of organizational culture, there is no homogenous culture. Every culture is still heterogeneous. There's still individual identities. It's just that they come together and unify. I think it's a really good point, Keron.
Thank you. And I think that's so true for US and many other countries I hear about who are especially driven, their economy is driven by immigrant engagement.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, thinking from that perspective, I mean, you saw this in Canada, you saw this in the
Mhm.
US, and then now you're able to look at your home country of India with different lenses. Can you talk a little bit to us just about, what are things that you see that the nonprofit sector, especially in the US or in Canada, that we do that make it difficult for immigrants to engage, the kinds of assumptions that maybe we make that are faulty that you see in the general nonprofit organizations that you've had exposure to? Talk to us about that. Like, what are we doing in the field that actually makes it more difficult for individuals who are coming in from other cultures to engage in the things they care about?
I think the big piece of engagement for immigrants is, again, when you look at that side where, community, that other side where community is engaging the immigrant, the piece of I really think the engagement piece here is how welcoming that community is for that individual. I might be driven to serve the community, but if I cannot find or cannot identify with an organization that aligns with what I want to serve at or that aligns with the skill set that I bring to, it's going to be difficult for me to be part of it. So I'll give you an example. My
Yeah.
husband, who is a physician, and he really is passionate about serving the community and helping individuals who do not have access to healthcare. So he literally seeked out organizations where he could use his healthcare skills and contribute to these organizations, to one of these very, very important nonprofit within Evansville area. So the what really helped was a nonprofit leader of that organization that welcomed him into that nonprofit. And eventually I went into that nonprofit as well and started serving. So I think that whole a piece of where, really the nonprofit leaders, the volunteers, the clear mission that helps serve better. The assumption is always going to be, oh, this person is so and so religion, so they are going to serve only certain kind of religious based nonprofit. It may or may not serve true for most people who are really engaged or who really want to contribute towards the service of humanity. So, and then when you look at, when in general, when you look at India versus Canada versus United States, again, that factor of multiple communities or duality of the community comes into the picture. One piece that I always get, I always stumble upon, and my husband does always also, is, when you want to make a physical, like a monetary donation,
Mhm.
which country should you go to?
Right.
And that's a struggle because you might, I mean, irrespective of the circumstances that individual left that country, there is still their family that they serve to. And a lot of immigrants send money back to their home countries to help their families. So we're always torn when it comes to supporting the needs of the community in the country we are living versus the community that we have left. And for someone like me who has three communities that I have to work with, it's a tough battle.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And the research shows that somewhere between 50 and $60 billion in additional giving outside of formally captured giving in the United States, which in the United States in 2022, just from that perspective, the most recent data that was there, Americans gave about $499 billion, but another 50 to 60 billion is from immigrants that are going to other countries, just as you said, that they're helping family members and relatives. And that's above and beyond giving. And it's so important to your point that we understand that, because that is truly part of the philanthropic motivation and impulse. And, one of the things, Keron, I think you bring to the table that's pretty fascinating is you have an amazing history in India, going back, 100 plus years with your grandfather and wanting to make sure to serve the needs of the region that you were in and try to do their best to eliminate poverty, which it then shapes your whole perspective on philanthropy. And it would seem that whether I know that or not, if I'm not taking the time to understand any donor, but especially an immigrant donor, there's an entire richness of how you would view my organization that I'm never going to appreciate, because it's been shaped by a cultural context that may be really foreign to my organization if I'm, operating in downtown Los Angeles.
Absolutely. And so, and I appreciate you bringing this up, because these, when you look at volunteerism within that immigrant population, that includes me, it's initially when you start volunteering, it's shaped by the needs, right? So
Right.
when you start coming to a new country, your needs are food, basic community food. Where can I find food? How do I get housing for immigrants who have young kids coming along? Their focus is, let's get kids to the school. Let's get admission started. Let's settle down with let's buy a house. Those are the signs where we are establishing a root. And then eventually it moves towards the personal influences, personal experiences. This is the time when our heads are above water and we can truly think beyond our survival, if I may say so.
Right.
And this is where, you bring that background of your own, where you came from. And I was fortunate to be in this family we have had philanthropy as our way of life. So my grandpa, to give you an example, he was orphaned at the age of 4. So his goal was nobody should go through the same things that I've gone through. And he decided he's going to establish a business in this community, which is now standing about 110 years resilient. And it became a backbone of the livelihood for everybody in within the small community that I'm from. So when you think of that legacy, my father built on that legacy. He started his philanthropic journey and used his influence to establish a primary care center. And for our audience who are not aware of a primary care center, it's essentially a government funded rural healthcare facility. And this center was so important to decrease our maternal and infant mortality rates. And then, he was also instrumental in starting a primary school that addressed the education gap and free meals to students. Because again, you bring that perspective. It's so important to understand the kids that are coming to the school they don't have the daily meals that they need to survive sometimes. And the school was an attraction point for food in general. And that's how we started working towards education of this kid. So, having this rich legacy where, grassroots engagement, where you have a community of 500 families and it has now grown. When I look at it, it's so humbling to see 1,000 families with all modern amenities. You could not picture this 110 years ago. So
Right.
being part of that just motivates me to do the same in a community, irrespective of where my physical presence is. So again, I'm still involved in my community back in India. I'm still involved in the community that I come from in Canada. And I am here now involved in the community very much in the Evansville area as well.
It's a great point. And, a great takeaway, I think, from that perspective is we have to, if I'm not taking the time, as we said, to really learn about all of my donors and volunteers, that's a huge miss, period. But as an immigrant, there's often a force that has shaped your narrative or an immigrant's narrative in ways that are really going to be transformative to how I even think about my organization, because I'm seeing it from a lens that has oftentimes a very direct channel to how they've engaged or why they want to engage. And if I'm not seeking that out, then I'm going to miss it. And I think a lot of times we make the assumption, to your point, about someone who's going to engage as a first or even second generation individual coming in, because I don't understand the duality that you mentioned earlier, that there are other constituencies, other communities that are a priority to you as an immigrant, like you mentioned, Canada and India. And if I'm not taking the time to get to know you, I don't understand and can't appreciate how that plays out. And also, I don't appreciate how my organization might be making that easier for you, or there might even be things that you're learning from us that you're able to then use with the other communities that you really do care about. There's such a richness there, to your point, Keron. And I think it's a good lesson for us, not to make assumptions and to validate those, to try to appreciate and learn about the duality. And going back to number 3, your Cobb salad example, that and I agree. I think Cobb salad's probably a better analogy, because each part of the salad brings its own value. And when it comes together, there's a great harmony of flavor. Whereas if it's just a melting pot, I lose a lot of pieces in that. And then I think the other element to that is, kind of your last comment, just to, really put context, that we can really create barriers for an immigrant to volunteer if I'm not understanding those key elements and I'm making the wrong assumptions. And even just the cultural divide, how are we talking about our organization by volunteering? When I look at, especially in your example, coming from India into Canada and then the United States, just words that I'm using may create the wrong connotation and confusion for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such a great point, Keron. I sure appreciate this. I think for all of our listeners, this gives us a number of kind of gut check items that we can go back and, ask, what are we saying? Do we understand our donors and volunteers? And, even ask the question, do I know who is a an immigrant that's in my volunteer and donor base. Do I understand?
Cool.
I think that's wonderful. It's a really great focus for us to kind of land the plane around this topic. Keron, any closing items before we bring this to a close on this element?
So I really, it really comes back to basics, Jamie. If I can use another analogy, and I love analogies here, if I can use that, it's like building a relationship. It's almost like starting a new relationship. For the immigrant and for the community at the same time. So if the new family is coming in, or new immigrants are coming in, the community needs to help build that trust. It's a back and forth, but initially, if only one person is giving and the other person is not helping, or not helping the purpose and creating barriers, that relationship is not going to work. It is the commitment really from both sides. So I want to implore our community to look beyond what we have done in past, and this is how we have done it, and it has always worked. Well, look beyond that and see what your community is consisting of. It may not look the same that you thought the way it looked 100 years ago. And I think that's where we challenge the norm. I really insist that we do that.
That's such a great point. And just if we don't stop and take those looks, then we can operate under the assumptions, to your point, that are completely incorrect, especially as the cultural dynamics of our communities are changing and not appreciating that and understanding that. Keron, this has been great. I so appreciate your taking the time to be with us, and look forward to, I think we've given some really great perspectives here that our listeners will have those diagnostic questions that, I need to kind of do a gut check here on a number of things. So I just can't thank you enough for your time.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.